I am Dr. Rhea Seddon. My claim to fame is that I was one of the first female astronauts. But to get there, I had to work hard, do my medical training, get my pilot's license. And after I finished medical school and my training, I found out that NASA was going to open up applications for the astronaut program, and that was in 1978. So I became an astronaut at that point in time. After I was an astronaut, I worked at a large medical center teaching teamwork to healthcare people, which was needed at the time. And then after that, I was president of a large ladies' charity organization. And then I wrote a book. So it's been a long journey for me.
Absolutely. And can you tell the kids some of the things that you were passionate about learning about when you were younger?
Oh, gosh, yes. You know, when you go through school, a lot of times you'll find what really interests you and what allows you to study further beyond what you learn in your classroom. And I was just fascinated by the life sciences, the living sciences, when I took biology in high school. And we had to dissect a frog, and everybody thought that was icky. And I thought it was the most exciting thing I had ever seen. So I began to read things about the life sciences, about medicine. And that led me to get into the healthcare world. So a lot of times you find something that just fascinates you and you want to spend more time than what's given to you in school. And I would encourage all of you to do that. You can go online nowadays and learn anything. Back then we had to find textbooks and magazine articles and things like that, which I found.
Absolutely. And I'm just going to jump into some student questions that are starting to get emailed to me and messaged to me in the chat. So one of the students wants to know, what was it like as a female taking on leadership roles at NASA?
Well, it was interesting. I think that some people are born leaders. I was not a born leader, but I wanted to do a lot of things at NASA. I think my biggest leadership role was on my third space shuttle flight when I was the payload commander. Now, the payload was what was ever carried on the shuttle. And on my third flight, it was all life sciences experiments. So I was in charge of coordinating all the life sciences experiments. And I had learned a lot about all of that, and I knew the payload well. And I was fortunate that I had that leadership role because it taught me how to lead and how to coordinate and how to involve everyone in the decision making. And so that was the thing that I think was my best learning experience that carried me through to other leadership roles. So that's how that evolved.
That's wonderful. And we have a question from Alice in Italy, and I'll go ahead and I'll unmute her so you can hear her. Alice, go ahead and ask.
Hi, when you became an astronaut, were you looked at from a different point of view?
Yes, probably. Because when I was selected as an astronaut, they had no women astronauts before. In 1978, they took a group of 35 new astronauts. 6 of us were women. So NASA didn't quite know what to do with us, and the men didn't quite know how to treat us. And so it took a little while for everybody to sort of figure out what was acceptable, what was not acceptable, what was doable, what was not doable. You know, I was the smallest astronaut that they had ever taken. And so I had to adapt to a world that was made for bigger people. And so I had to do that. And I did. So a lot of times that's what you have to do to fit in, and I wanted very much to fit in.
Absolutely. We have a question from our friend Ian he is in Spain, and Ian, you should be able to ask your question, friend.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
I wanted to know how you felt when the rocket took off.
Oh, can you imagine? sitting on top of 4.5 million pounds of explosives. And then they light the fuse, and it was very exciting. But you know, the preparation had been a long time coming. I had trained, I had worked, and everything, and it you know, it took me several years of training to be ready. And so when they ignited the rocket and it took off, I thought, gosh, it's going to happen. It's really going to happen. And it was a very exciting 8.5 minutes to get to orbit. And then I got to unstrap my seatbelt and I was weightless for a week. So that was the most amazing thing that I had ever experienced. And it was wonderful.
One of the students from France wants to know, could you guys hear anything while you were out in space doing your spacewalks other than the microphone feed or headphone feed?
No, when you have your helmet on doing a spacewalk, all you hear is what comes to you through your earphones. And of course, if you wanted to raise your helmet so you might be able to hear space noise, you would die. So nobody has ever done that, I don't believe. They may have recorded some things from space, but I doubt that there's much noise out there except the ambient noise that's created by the motors and the things that are on your vehicle. But that's an interesting question. They ought to see if they can record space noise. An interesting thing that I found out is that they figured out what the moon smells like because some dust came into the capsule when they were walking on the moon, and it had a peculiar smell. So that was a kind of an interesting thing that at least, you know, we know of a place that has a different odor, but I'm not sure about the noise part. They'll have to explore that a little further.
We'll have to circle back around. So one of the students right here in Nevada, they would like to know, I think they're from an elementary school around here, but they want to know, did you ever see gamma rays while you were out in space?
I don't know about gamma rays. Of course, we had to wear sensors that picked up radiation. The things that we did notice, and I'm trying to remember what kind of particle they were, when you would go to sleep at night and close your eyes and it was dark, frequently we had a mask on to block out any light, you could see flashes of light, and it was from particles that went through the back of your eye and generated enough energy that it looked like a flash of light to you. So it's kind of weird to think that, you know, when you're in space, even when you're in an enclosed area where most of the radiation can't get through, that some does. And I think that's probably one of the things we're going to have to study further as we go to Mars. What comes through and what can mess you up or drill a hole through you that you're not even aware of, tiny, tiny hole. And I think that's a very interesting thing to study, but that's the only time I was really aware of any sort of radiation at all.
Absolutely. One of the kids also here in the States, they want to know, what was the process and what was it like working at NASA?
Well, the process was to fill out an application, which I did in 1977, mailed it in, and so did 8,700 other people. So I figured the odds weren't very good. But they narrowed it down to 220, I believe, that came to NASA for an interview. And they really told you what the job was like, and then they asked you questions about yourself. So you had to be able to answer questions about your background and what you hope to study if you went to space, and some questions like that. And then an astronaut selection board would vote on you, and then the people that did the best on the physical exam and the interview, and just basically your personality were admitted. So that was the process that went into getting into the astronaut program. And then we had to go through 2 years of training before we were real astronauts and eligible for flight. And that involved a lot of academics, classroom work. You had to learn about the space shuttle and space and the sciences that were going to go on board. So there was a lot of training before you could ever be assigned to a flight, and a lot of a process that you had to go through. But it's pretty much that way with any big job that you apply for.
Absolutely. And for those of you who are further interested in Dr. Seddon and her work, as well as where you can purchase her book, it's on her website that's out in the chat right now, and I'll have that in the video for everybody as well. The students want to know what kind of experience or emotion is it like seeing Earth from space?
Oh, it just takes your breath away. You know, we just flew in a low Earth orbit, so we could not see the full Earth like they did from the moon, but we could see large swaths of Earth. People would say, well, how much of the Earth could you see from an altitude of 200 miles or something? And I tell you that there are some landmarks when you're going around the Earth that you can pick out. One of them is San Diego. It has an unusual coastline. And when you were flying over San Diego, you could see the Black Hills of North Dakota. So that was a large part of the Earth. I remember also as we were coming over the East Coast, and I was kind of looking for Tennessee. So we were down kind of near the East Coast of the United States. And one of the people on board looked up the coastline and said, "What is that Long Island?" Well, it's Long Island, New York. So that gives you some idea of how much of the Earth you could see at once. But of course, you had to look quickly, because even if you saw something really interesting or that you could identify, you know, it didn't take very long that you couldn't see it anymore. So you had to look quick. And if you're going to take a picture, you had to be ready and take a picture quick.
You know, I've heard a quote, and this is from you, where you talk about how there's no borders. And that is incredible, because every map that we see, we have people on here from Germany, Spain, Italy, France, Greece, I think Israel, Nevada, Florida, all these different borders. But what is that like, seeing the Earth with no borders?
It is amazing, and it reminds you that we're all one people. And, you know, we're so connected, particularly in Europe, where the countries, the whole countries are small. You can go from one country through another in a very short period of time. The United States, of course, has states, but we're all one country. But it's fascinating to think of how that all evolved and how countries became big countries, small countries, the wars that created their borders. And, you know, fascinating for us here in the United States is that so many of you speak foreign languages. Like, you're speaking English to me. I would have a hard time remembering the French that I took in high school. I can read it a little bit, but, you know, we're just fascinated by others that their countries are so close that they have to learn several different languages, and that's amazing. But yes, in space, you really can't tell one country from another, even one state from another. You can see large rivers. We could see the Mississippi River, and I knew that Tennessee was on the east side of that. So, you know, it's fascinating to see it from up there. And there are some wonderful pictures that you can go and look at and figure out, is there a picture of my home country? And I would suggest that you do that. There are lots of good NASA pictures of just about everything.
That's phenomenal advice, and that's directly from an expert. We have a question from our friend Pablo in Spain, and Pablo, you should be able to unmute. I really liked your question.
Yeah, nice to meet you. My question was, working in the NASA and becoming an astronaut was in your plans, or was an opportunity that simply appeared? Thank you.
I'm sorry, what was the first part of the question?
Working in the NASA and becoming an astronaut was in your plans, or was an opportunity that simply appeared to you? Thank you.
When I was almost 10 years old, I stood in the backyard, and if you read my book, you'll read about this. My father took me out in the backyard and said, "Look up there, that's Sputnik." It was the first satellite to ever orbit the Earth. And I was just really impressed with it. I was 10 years old, and I thought, oh, that is so neat. And I asked my father, will people go into space one day? And he said, probably. And I said, could I go into space? And he laughed a little bit because it was such an oddball question. He said, yeah, baby, I bet you could. So I set out when I was 10 years old to try to figure out if there was ever going to be a time or a way for me to become an astronaut. And they didn't take anything but men who were all test pilots in the early days of the United States test space program. But then when the space shuttle came along, they needed larger crews, they needed scientists, and so they took women and they took non-pilots and they took scientists. So I was very lucky that the opportunity to make my dream come true came along at the right time.
So we have a question from Miss Quinn's class at Pinecrest Academy of Nevada, Cadence campus, and they want to know, were you scared when you left orbit for the first time?
Yeah, a little bit. Of course, the shuttles had launched and landed, and everybody knew that there was some risk involved in the launch. And then during the landing, you knew that you would be going through the atmosphere to get back down to Earth, and that the oxygen molecules and stuff would heat up around you as you came back through the atmosphere. And I knew it because people had told me about it, but it was pretty frightening because it felt like you were flying through a blowtorch as you descended through the atmosphere. It was very white hot outside, and it looked like fire was out there. And that we knew when I was flying that that we were well protected. We didn't feel any heat. We didn't sense that there was fire outside, but you could look out the window and see it. There's some pictures in my book of what that looks like. So it was a bit frightening, but all of us were, we were willing to take the risks involved. And as I say, others had flown before me. And of course, those of you know about the history of NASA, one of the shuttle flights had a problem coming back into the atmosphere. We had one shuttle that was destroyed on launch, and we had another that was destroyed on re-entry. So it's a scary time, but astronauts are willing to do scary things.
I mean, it comes back to that great sacrifice and great gain, and you were part of that crew to go out there and make that sacrifice. And thank you for doing that for science and for all of mankind. And on another note, congratulations on being inducted in the Astronaut Hall of Fame in 2015. One of our kids in France wants to know, what was that like?
Ooh, that was quite unexpected. And I was overjoyed. My husband had been inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame a few years before that, and I never thought that I would get in. It's quite competitive, as you can imagine. You're nominated, and then other astronauts get to vote on you, and they vote on contributions you made and what you've done since NASA. And I never considered that I would get in. There were very few women who had, and most of them had been the first at something. Sally Ride was the first woman that flew, and Eileen Collins was the first pilot on the shuttle, female pilot. So it didn't occur to me that I'd get in. And one day my husband took a phone call and he said, "Hey, this is for you. It's from Dan Brandenstein." And he was head of the astronaut program then. And I picked up the phone. I thought, what is he calling me? He says, "We'd just like you to know you've been inducted into the Astronaut Hall of Fame." And my husband and I both cried. So it was very special, still very special to get into the Astronaut Hall of Fame.
Oh, it's unimaginable. And before we let you go, because we know time is wrapping up, first of all, thank you for joining us today, to all the students and teachers all over the world. And thank you, Dr. Seddon, for speaking with us. Before we let you go, before we end the meeting for all, is there any advice you could give to these students all over the world as they go out and figure out what they want to be and what they want to do?
Sure. It's at first, study everything, look at everything, and then determine a goal and work very hard towards the goal. Most good things come to us when we work hard and persist and try. And I always tell people to have a backup plan. And every step of my careers, if I couldn't get into one thing, I kind of had a plan to do something else. So work hard, dream big, have a backup plan. In short, that's a way you're going to be successful.